It was particularly that thought that, with rats running around your house and you've got a tiny baby, they can get into the cot, they can chew on the baby. And the locals, they did. Locals lived with rats. They tended to eat the dead skin off their feet and that sort of thing.
Way.
They would eat all their food and their clothes. And so I did feel quite traumatized.
Yeah.
I prayed to God saying, you need to take this away. And he didn't.
Hi guys, Matt here from Frontiers. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Raw Mission, the podcast where we bring you challenging and inspiring stories of ordinary folks sharing the good news of our extraordinary God in some of the toughest parts of the world. From time to time, I like to invite guests onto the show who aren't from Frontiers. After all, there are so many wonderful mission agencies out there who share our passion for the lost, for Muslims and for gospel-deprived peoples. We want to learn from them too and hear some of their stories. So today I have my old friends Tim and Bronwen joining me. They spent a decade church planting in Mozambique with AIM, Africa Inland Mission, living in a very poor coastal area of East Africa among a Muslim people group called the Mwani. Welcome guys, good to see you today.
Thank you, it's great to see you too.
Hi Matt, yeah, great to be here. Thanks for inviting us.
Nice. And so it was at All Nations that we met, wasn't it? And tell us a little bit about your background, guys, how you got interested in God's global heart and what took you to All Nations and where you went after that, perhaps.
Well, for me, as I was growing up, I had a growing sense that God had something for me, but I didn't really know what it was. And through university, that grew. And I just had a real sense that I shouldn't go into graduate trainee jobs and things like that. And so, I was studying history. So what can you do with history apart from know how to give orders at McDonald's? That I didn't really feel I hadn't had anything, but I had some education, I guess. So I thought, well, maybe I could use that. So at the time, AIM had this program where you could go and teach for a year in Kenya. And so I thought that would be cool. Honestly, one of my main motivations for going to Africa was because I wanted to see elephants.
Nice.
And AIM and the program seemed really good. And so I did a year with them in East Africa, working Christian Union at the school. So I had a real sense of, wow, God can use me somehow. I came back to the UK and after some bits and pieces went to All Nations where I met Bron. But you were a very different angle, weren't you?
Hang on, I need to know though, did you see the elephants? That's pretty important.
I did see, and they were pretty cool. They were amazing. I love them. Actually, it was giraffe. Really.
Even better, yeah.
Enormous.
Lucky enough to go to sub-Saharan Africa and not in Kenya, but in Zimbabwe. And wow, yeah, it is amazing, isn't it? Yeah. What about you, Bron? Then you were definitely not a sub-Saharan Africa girl when we all met at All Nations. Yeah.
Africa was definitely not on my radar at all. Having studied Spanish at university and actually got it put on my heart a long time before, the children of the world, particularly those in poverty. And I'd seen a documentary about Latin America. Anyway, I went out to Latin America with a ministry called SAMS, even though I wasn't Anglican. Ended up there for 3 years working with street children and absolutely fell in love with the people, the culture, the ministry. And I was dead certain that that's where I was going to spend the rest of my life. I ended up at All Nations because I knew I needed a bit more training, particularly in the biblical side, and loved All Nations. But after 2 years, I was fairly certain that why wouldn't I go back to South America? There was a role there for me. I spoke the language fluently. I knew the culture. God sometimes brings surprises in, and I met Tim in the first term of All Nations, and things started to happen, and it was a fantastic time getting to know each other, but it was also quite a painful time as we realized that maybe God had something for us together, but worlds apart in some ways, continents, different callings.
Yeah, I remember you guys wrestling with that. I remember chatting with Tim and, you guys were dating and just thinking, well, how do our worlds collide? I mean, I'm so set on Africa and you were so set on Latin America, and it was such a struggle, wasn't it? Is this God's will?
At the same time, for me, I was I was growing more as I was thinking about what the Lord would have for me to do. And it was increasingly, particularly Romans 10, where Paul talks about, you know, how can they hear unless, or how can they believe unless they hear, and how can they hear unless someone preaches and goes. And that was, you know, wherever Paul talked about wanting to build on no one else's foundations, or go to place it never had the chance to hear. And as I studied and thought about things, and particularly Muslims started to be more on my radar, realizing that there were whole huge areas or huge people groups that had never had the chance to hear about Jesus. And that really became, for me, I mean, I left Kenya thinking, I don't want to go there, because there are far too many Christians, far too many missionaries, and far too many, the whole culture was just kind of Christianized, but actually not at the same time. So I came away thinking, not Kenya, but that had been my experience.
Unreached peoples. And
yeah, very much so.
I think one of the key things at All Nations for me, and I would recommend it for anybody, it's an amazing place to open up your mind, because I had a love for God and a love for my calling working with children. But what All Nations did was it opened up my mind to see that your calling is not that narrow. Actually, I was called into mission, into, you know, seeking the lost for God, and that may be different, but there are children all over the world, not just in one little location in South America. And I came to, you know, hear about the unreached people groups and realized there are a lot of children, and God started to work on my heart as well. And we did try and do the sensible thing. We visited different locations, including South America, and looked at North Africa. We looked at a variety of places to see, well, where could God use both of our hearts and bring our skills together. And we ended up doing a visit to Mozambique in sub-Saharan Africa. And because they spoke Portuguese, which was similar to Spanish, my natural language fit, and there were plenty of children. We visited a very unreached people group along the coast of East Africa, which was 99% Muslim. And the team there was absolutely fantastic. And we just felt this amazing sense of peace that, yes, God could use both of us. We could thrive in what he wants us to do here.
That's really good. And isn't Mozambique, I don't know about nowadays, but at some point it's been the poorest country in the world, hasn't it?
It was certainly in the top 5 or even top 3 over when they had floods. And I'm going to go in and out now. It was getting a lot better when we got there. It's got a lot worse, particularly in the north, where it was decimated by local terrorism again. And
so then you guys, then having got married, did you have a year or so before you went long term to Mozambique?
Yes, so we got married straight after All Nations. Yes, we took a year and a half out roughly just to have a bit of normal life, whatever normal is these days, know each other. And in that time, we used it to pray, to talk to different mission agencies, to visit some of these locations, and towards, joining up with a ministry. We wanted a ministry that had experience and wisdom behind it. And we ended up looking at AIM, Africa Inland Mission, and they were great in their counsel and support.
So you found this location in Mozambique where there was a team already working, and it was in the north, right? In a very Muslim part of Mozambique. I don't know much about the country there, but obviously many countries in sub-Saharan Africa are split, with the north very Muslim and the south very Christian. Is that Mozambique? Is that the same?
Well, I would say sub-Saharan Africa is like that. Certainly the Sahel, the
right
of the Sahara,
yes,
like that. So if you're thinking Niger and Nigeria and all those places,
Uganda, Kenya,
But for Eastern Africa, if you think where Islam started in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, those places, the peninsula, Islam moved by the trade routes and by where the wind took the traders. And so that was down the coast. And so you can actually see about halfway down Mozambique, the trade winds would change. And so they reached halfway down, and then when the trade winds changed, it would blow them back. So that's where Islam, just on the coast, within about 5 miles of the coast, that's where Islam was, and then it stopped. And so we were quite close to the Tanzanian border. So the people group we ended up with called the Mwani. They'd been Muslim for a millennia or so. But then very quickly you go inland and Islam stopped, and it became this very animistic, very traditional African religions, fear of the evil spirits, that's charms and all that sort of stuff. And actually, many Muslims had that too. Many Mwani had that too. So a real mixture.
I would say, what you mentioned about the split between Christian and Muslim, it was a very complex people that we worked with, and that's part of the struggles I think we had, because there was this strong, obviously, Muslim identity amongst the Mwani, but the other tribe that lived in the town were nominally Catholic because of the Portuguese colony, a Christian country, but a Catholic Christian country. But both sides were very folk religious, so mixing their animistic backgrounds. So you have this melting pot of and faiths, and quite a lot of tension between the different tribes and the different languages in the one town. And we came into that as foreigners, and it was quite a delicate balance to try and work alongside some of the Christians and try and outreach the Muslims who hated each other.
Wow. Yeah. Did it spark off into violence, or was it more just a sort of, we don't associate with them, looking down on them?
It sparked into violence a few weeks after we arrived in this sleepy little fishing town. Yeah, it was quite an eye-opener into our mission walk as a couple, because I think we'd come from quite positive experiences in mission before, in non-conflict areas. And a few weeks or a month or so after we arrived, suddenly there was this conflict that was sparked by a few of the Muslims killing and acting aggressively towards the Christians, and I think they killed some of the police. So there was a lot of this conflict going on, and we had to leave the town together. And in fact, when we came back, our team leaders were quite traumatized and weren't even sure if they would come back. And this was supposed to be the start of our life in town together. So there was a lot of uncertainty right at the beginning and worry. And you saw the reality actually of working alongside these different people groups. And
that reminds me of my first few weeks and months in Pakistan, pretty similar. A lot of crazy terrorist attacks kicking off. It certainly wakes you up, doesn't it, to the reality of life for many people out there dealing with violence.
But the reality for us was that we also had a 3-month-old child, our daughter Katie,
right?
Then, and so we were trying to basically build our house, not from scratch. It was an old colonial cement house, but the roof needed help, and there were no doors and windows or any plumbing or electricity or anything.
Wow.
There was no water or electricity, and so our team leader was he was doing that, but obviously had to leave for a number of months, and so it was left to me. We'd spent a year in Portugal learning Portuguese, and that was invaluable. We just could not have survived if we did communicate.
Yeah,
many of the people spoke Kimwani, and that was, I remember that was an incredibly difficult. The first 6 months of our time, we had disasters along the way. One of them was probably one of my worst specific evenings, was when, because there's no electricity, we were living in some of our colleagues who were on home assignment their house, and so they put in a solar system, and they had a kerosene fridge, which is a real luxury. Driven up the 2,500 kilometers from South Africa on the back of their vehicle to where we were. It's priceless in that sense.
Yeah.
But many missionaries called it the missionary idol, because in order to fill it up, you've got to get down on your hands and knees and basically kerosene, and then getting the wick, lighting it again is really complex. And so you can spend quite a bit of time on your hands and knees in front of this fridge.
No.
This fridge. But it was dark, and I stupidly decided to fill the tank up in situ rather than taking it out. I thought that would save me time and effort. Whilst it was still lit. Bad mistake. So I overfilled it, and it started pouring out underneath the fridge in the dark. I couldn't see.
Oh no!
The kerosene lit. It's not like petrol.
Basically set fire to our house.
Yeah, let's tell it how it is, Bronwen. Tim basically burned your house down.
Well, thankfully it was made of concrete, so nothing caught.
Yeah.
But the whole house was
But
smoked out.
it's still fairly traumatic in your first couple of months when you've got a tiny baby and we've out of the house and nowhere to stay.
It wasn't. We were borrowing it.
Yeah, it wasn't even your fridge. Oh, and I mean, the stresses and the struggles on a marriage as well. Even in those early days, nobody really knows what's going on. You have to trust each other. You don't know if each other are doing the right thing.
Not that. But you said after you can't really remember the first 6 months because you were crying so much.
Oh.
Yeah.
And then my mum died after 7 months.
Oh, wow.
So we had to, that was kind of expected, but it was still the trauma of back to the UK and
being so far away from family when things like that.
Yeah.
It's difficult making that call when to go back. Do you go back before the person dies to see them, or do you go back? There's a lot of decisions that you don't realize you have to take before you go on the field.
And generally, life out there, you said there's a lot of poverty around you. Give us some more examples of what that looked like.
Well, so as Tim mentioned, the first town we lived in had no running water or electricity. So we were very blessed, very fortunate to have a house where we built in our own water systems and solar panels. But most of the locals lived in quite simple, basic mud and stick clay kind of huts with what they would call putti roofing, which is kind of like palm leaf roofing. And the women particularly, they were the ones that I connected with. Many of them were uneducated, so didn't speak Portuguese, the language that we'd been studying for years, and which is why we had to learn the local language as well. But they spent most of their days just trying to survive. That would involve walking a long distance to get water from the wells. They were very strong physical women because, they were always carrying things, whether it's the water back from the well, whether it's carrying a massive sack of rice from the market.
Children.
Carrying usually with a child on your back.
Yeah.
Going to the paddy fields, the rice fields, and working for weeks, months there with cuts over your legs and, having to bring all that back to town to sell. It was a very physically grueling life. Also with no medical care.
Yeah, I was going to say, did you guys get sick much, or your kids?
We learned to pray a lot, and it was one of the big concerns for us and for our family sending us that we were going to a place with no doctor.
Wow.
You learned to quickly become the local pharmacy. Even to you for medicine and aid. And we were very blessed again, I would say, in the 10 years we were generally healthy. There were one or two scary moments during the time out there. I think a few years later, our daughter got very sick when she was about 9 years old. It turned out it was some sort of tummy bug, but she ended up vomiting for about a week and just couldn't keep any water or food down. She obviously started losing weight, and we had to have her medevac flown out down to South Africa.
Wow.
And that was quite a scary night because I remember obviously you can't get immediate ambulances or planes out there. And the local friend who was a doctor who worked with the leprosy mission, he said, well, she may have appendicitis, it may be about to burst, and she may need emergency treatment. But obviously we couldn't get any emergency treatment.
Yeah.
We just had to pray. I remember lying with her praying that night and just giving her into God's hands. And you have a lot of situations like that where you are totally reliant on God and God holds your life in your hands. But we can pray to him that he did carry our family through that time.
And then what about just bugs and other things, creepy crawlies? Is it that kind of environment?
Very much so.
Yeah, Tim, we realised possibly how we traumatised our children when we came back, because we were around a friend's house once, and I think somebody mentioned a rat or pets or something, and little Jamie, who's about 7, started talking about Daddy and his rat basher. And we were like, shh, don't tell them. But yes, rats were a definite part of our daily life. rats, bats, all sorts of bugs and snakes. We killed several snakes on our property.
Ooh.
But I remember after the first couple of years, I had a list of all the things I hated about Mozambique.
Yeah.
Beautiful things about the country, particularly the Indian Ocean, eating mangoes. We genuinely did like and love about it, but there were a lot of things we genuinely hated and made our life very stressful. And for me, rats was at the top. And I remember praying after a couple of years when we came home, thinking, God, I just can't go back into this situation. Things have got to change. And I wrote a list of like the pros and the cons, and the things we liked about Mozambique was quite a short list compared to the long list, and rats was at the top.
Yeah.
It was particularly that thought that, you know, with rats running around your house and you've got a tiny baby, they can get into the cot, they can chew on the baby. And the locals, Locals lived with rats. They tended to eat the dead skin off their feet and that sort of thing.
Way.
They would eat all their food and their clothes. And so I did feel quite traumatized.
Yeah.
I prayed to God saying, you need to take this away. And he didn't. We went back, and obviously you can't suddenly exterminate all of the rats. Well, I guess God can, but he chose not to exterminate all of the rats in the country. But somehow going back, he had mysteriously changed my heart so that I felt I could live with them. And we became tougher on them. We learned to deal with them. And even a couple of years later, when one rat got into our bed and bit me on the foot, it didn't traumatize me like it used to. We killed the rat. We took our own revenge, but you know,
I've got some great images of you guys running around with, I don't know what you're using, like blocks of wood.
Giant stick and bashing rats to death.
The broom was actually my preferred.
Your broom, huh?
Reach.
Oh. Yes, it's not too close to you. It feels like some kind of old Disney cartoon.
It did feel.
That's what's going through my mind right now.
Yeah, the kids would love it. They would watch, kind of laughing. Is Daddy going to get the rat?
Yeah.
It's life. They didn't.
Tim 1, rat 0.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I never really had that many rats in Pakistan. We'd have mice and things like that. Jess always laughs, like, never look the mice in the eyes. They're going to come and get you if you glue them with your eyes. Just always turn away. But yeah, we caught a few of them. Well, I always found, even if you catch a mouse, what do you do with it? You know, you just shove it outside, it'll come back in again, or do you feed it to the cat?
No, we
drown it. Yeah, you have to if it's rats.
Practically, we didn't catch them. You have to kill them as they're.
Yeah.
Apart from the trap.
We did have the locals. The locals, how do you catch rats? And they had a special kind of a lobster catch.
Oh, yeah.
But that's possibly too gruesome a story about how.
Yeah, we won't go there. Wow. So it's funny because I often say to people that, guys, when you think about missionaries, we don't all live in poor places like mud huts around us and snakes and rats and so on. That's not most guys who work with us, certainly in Frontiers. You know, the Muslim world is so diverse. Many of us live in very different environments, but you guys did it. I mean, you were right there, poor area of, oh gosh, I can't imagine what that would be like.
I mean, the reality is where we were in, it was a town of 40,000. It was just really basic, but Africa as a continent is doubling its population in the next 20 years, and more people will live in cities than rural areas. So it's changing incredibly quickly. Yeah, and that's a real challenge on so many different levels, but it's also a challenge in terms of the need to share Christ and sub-Saharan Africa. There are lots of Christians, but the work that we're involved in AIM and others are doing is to help them see that when Jesus said, "Go into all the world and make disciples," that's for them to do, not for people just coming into Africa. So
that's right.
But the potential is also amazing to send workers into those Muslim areas.
Yes, I love that. I remember meeting a guy from Nigeria, wonderful Christian brother, and I said to him, "So, help me out here, because half your country is like really strong church, thriving churches, way more than in the UK, and you guys have so much to teach us, and we've got so much to learn from you, and you're even coming to Britain and helping the church here strengthen. But tell me what." How does the church in Nigeria look at the north of Nigeria with all those Muslim peoples up there? I said, "Do you have a vision to reach them?" He said, "Yes, brother, we have a big vision. We're going to, for 50,000 Nigerians to reach the Muslims of the world, I don't know, North Nigeria, by 2025. And I was like, wow, that is so cool. And how's that vision going? Like, what does it look like on the ground? He said, oh, well, yeah, we haven't really, at the moment it's just vision. I was like, okay, well, that's amazing. It all starts with vision. But I think that's the challenge, isn't it, for the church in the UK, the church in Nigeria, wherever the church is, in Korea, Latin America. Where do we distribute our resources? Where do we send our people? Whether it's in our countries or outside of our borders, doesn't matter so much. But let's find those who've not got the gospel.
And that's part of what we were doing with the locals, because I said where we were, there were some Christians. And part of what we were doing is trying to give them the skills and the vision to actually put in place, reaching their Muslim brothers and sisters, and seeing that actually these Muslims needed Christ, because very often the response, well, they don't want to hear the gospel. They're Muslims. Yes. And we're like, that's why they hear the gospel. They worship. They don't really know who God is. They're afraid of, and that gives them no certainty. And we have a message of certainty and hope. And so, it was working alongside them to.
Yes. So good. So important. So we touched on folk Islam and animistic practices mixing even within the church. Have you got any stories that help us see what that looks like on the ground? What does that look like in practice?
I suppose the thing that jumps to my mind, you possibly can talk about charms and babies and women. That was very much Bron's area of being, whereas mine, not surprisingly, I didn't hang out with the women with the babies. But one of our neighbours across the road, we tried different things. For us, it was early days in terms of discipleship making movements or anything like that. It was kind of before that had come onto our radar, but we were starting to get into Bible storying, which I still think is brilliant with working with Muslims to start where they're at. Many Muslims accept the prophets, Noah, and they've got names for them, and all that. So we would start with them, but all the way through those stories, you can share the gospel, because you can show sin, how God hates sin, and how we can't save ourselves from sin, and that God is involved in saving people. So I was doing this with our friend Abdul, and one day I went across the street to sit with him outside his house, and he was freaked. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen someone who is so scared, just like scared, his roots, his heart. He was just absolutely scared. What's going on, Abdul?
Panic.
Yes, what's the problem? And he said, well, haven't you heard? Because we lived, what was it, maybe 400 yards from the cemetery?
The local cemetery.
Something, it was pretty close. It was just down that street. And the night before, they'd buried a guy down in the cemetery. And then he and lots of other people had gone the next morning, and they'd seen the guy they'd buried alive, but with the head of a goat.
Wow.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. What do you do with that? Yeah.
Like, how do I react?
Yeah.
They don't have to respond to these things in mission college.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's blatantly not Islam. So it's not Islam. It's, it's completely animistic, And I mean, I just said to him, well, I'm a follower of the Lord Jesus Christ. Remember that story you did about creation? God made the whole world, including all spirits. Everything is under his authority. I am his follower, and so I come under his authority. Nothing can touch me because I'm following Jesus. And you can have that too.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I didn't go down there and try and see it. But it graphically showed to me the reality of the spiritual world that we were now living in, and the power of fear, and fear enormous. And so just we asked questions after what was going on, and it turns out part of the local practice of the evil witch doctors, because there are a number of they had a couple of different types of witch doctors, but was to basically use their magic to raise these people up so that they could control them to go in and steal from people's homes. So it was all personal gain.
Yeah.
why they did it.
It's just another world, isn't it? It's so hard for our minds to even comprehend this sort of stuff. Shamans and witch doctors and magic practices and bizarre things happening. I've got other friends who've lived and worked in Africa from our culture, and they're the same. They say, I can't even tell half the stories I've heard of or seen because people in England just think you're bonkers. It makes no sense.
But you can't dismiss it to the locals and dismiss it as superstitious or silly.
Yeah.
Because they're genuinely great. And who are we? Jesus dealt with spirits and evil going on. So you have where the gospel meets and that, well, actually, Jesus has all power and authority.
Yes, and that's a huge lesson for us. Just this week, I was back at All Nations teaching about gospel paradigms. And if you only ever talk about sin and forgiveness to the guy who's petrified of an evil spirit, he's not listening to that. He's not worried about his guilt right now. He's worried about the power of that witch doctor, that spirit. And he needs a message of hope that is equally the gospel, because it's right there in Acts and Ephesians and everything else. The power of Jesus as victor, Jesus as conqueror, as well as Lord and King, not just Jesus as savior and sacrifice. And the gospel's so beautiful, isn't it? Because it all merges together, and we just have to work out which part of the story to share.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And Jesus, that same power, Jesus as healer, is a very powerful thing in a place. I mean, we learned that personally in a place where there is no doctor.
Yeah,
we're so comfortable, we're so blessed with our medical resources over here, and I think it's a wonderful thing. But we are very reliant on it spiritually as well, aren't we? I mean, there's a beautiful story of the neighbour. In fact, she was the wife of Abdul, Rakia, who became one of my closest friends out there. And I tried doing some Bible story with her, but often the women weren't so interested because they were focused very much on daily survival and all their chores. But she, like many women, had a medical problem, which she shared with me one day about bleeding. And part of the reason I had time to sit with her is because she didn't go to the mosque as often as other women. In fact, she hardly ever went. And it's bleeding because she wasn't allowed to go into the mosque. She didn't feel clean enough to pray. And she shared this with me, and it gave me the opportunity to share. I wanted to have done the Bible stories chronologically, but I decided just to jump in with this story about Jesus healing the bleeding woman who touched his robe and how she'd been bleeding for many years. And I told this story to her in Kimwani, and she was absolutely bowled over by it. And we prayed, and she decided from then on that she would come and listen to some of the stories with me. And so we started praying together, and after we prayed, she came running and said, I've been healed. My bleeding stopped.
No way.
More of the Bible stories. And it was so exciting.
Wow.
Jesus had stepped into her life. And as we started doing the Bible stories, I managed to go back to Genesis and we did a few, and we got all the way through to one of the last ones, which is about the Holy Spirit. And I asked her at the end of it, I said, well, would you like me to pray for the Holy Spirit to come to you? And so I prayed for her there and then. And I'm not sure what I was expecting, but nothing, dramatic happened. And she kind of said, okay, thank you. Is that it then? I was like, okay. And she went back home, and Tim and I then left the town. Actually, we had to go on a trip for a week or so.
Yeah.
We came back. I'd forgotten it all, thought nothing of it. But the minute we arrived home, Rakia came running round to our house, banging on the door. She said, I need to talk to you. And I was like, okay. And she was like, that day you prayed for me. I went back home, and that night I slept, and I had a dream. And this person came to me in this dream, dressed in a white robe. And he was leaning out to me saying, do not be afraid. You can follow me. Do not be afraid.
Wow.
Who is this person? I was flabbergasted. I said,
oh my goodness.
Who do you think he is, Rakia? He said, is that the Jesus you've been telling me about? And I said, well, I think so, Rakia.
Yes. Wow.
He said, you can follow him. And it was just, it was an amazing way that God had worked, not through me, but
so precious. I mean, I've got goosebumps listening to that story, and we spend years sometimes and we look back and think, what was that all about? What fruit did we see? And then you remember the little stories, those moments where you know what, that family's life was touched, that lady's life was touched by the power of God and the good news of the gospel. Oh, that is beautiful. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Wow. Yeah, any other little anecdotes of life out there? Maybe some other stories of, where the gospel was, having an impact and seeing lives changed.
Yeah, well, we were a group with AIM, but there were obviously lots of other people working around. And as you say, that was one story that we remember very keenly, because we remember it mostly as 10 years of quite dry work with Mwani. They were very hard-hearted people. Sometimes we would show interest, but often it was just because they wanted money out of us. Some would get all excited and come forward, and then very soon fall back into alcoholism or other ways. So it was a tough time, but there were other groups working, and I don't know whether maybe you want to share one group you knew of.
So we got to know a precious Mozambican brother called Kutapata, which was his Kimwani name, but he wasn't Mwani. He was from a very near culture people group down the coast. So they, like the Mwani, fishermen, like the Mwani, are Muslim, but just separated by about 300 kilometers or so down the coast. And he came through, and we got to know him, and started to hear some of the story, because you're Koti, you were a Muslim, but now you're actually a fellow missionary. Come here to share Christ with the Mwani. What's going on? What's your story? And it turned out about maybe 10 years previously, God did amazing work amongst the Koti. Literally miracles, and it's just astounding. And I don't know that I've got time to go into all of the details now, unfortunately, but this Kutapata he had been a Muslim Islamic teacher, so he spoke Arabic, and he was very well seen. But speaking to him, he talked about the need for I need to be saved, which was remarkable. It was like he was actually using that terminology, and I don't think he had picked it up from Christians. He knew there was something wrong. He needed to get it sorted. And so when some Mozambican and missionaries from outside came in, and they were able to very, very wisely, they were able to talk about knowing God. They disconnected their message from their own culture, which is often a huge challenge, is to show people Jesus without bringing in all the baggage of the culture. And so they very wisely were able to do that. And and it helped that God basically blew their boat up onto his island, which the local chief had forgotten to list on their list to visit. God basically put them there.
Wow.
And they were able to share Christ. And this tiny little island, which was being blown away it was being destroyed by the wind over a number of years. They were just ready, and they responded to Christ. And so Kutapata responded, and God did an amazing work. And so where there had been 0 followers of Christ amongst this people group of about 60,000, in very, very quickly, a couple of thousand turned to Christ.
Wow, that's amazing. If you're enjoying this podcast, why not give us a 5-star rating so that more folks can hear these inspiring stories and join us in praying, sending, giving and going? Or how about inviting me or one of my colleagues to speak at your church? I'd love to hear from you. Email me on matt@frontiers.org.uk. And now back to the podcast.
Where there had been 0 followers of Christ amongst this people group of about 60,000, in very, very quickly, a couple of thousand turned to Christ.
Wow, that's amazing.
So much so that they're like, we need to send our own workers to the rest of Mozambique, to the rest of our...
yes, amen.
I think that was the amazing thing. It was one person we'd seen locals, poor as they were, make that journey over to another tribal group.
That's right.
Need to share what they had heard with others.
And it was utterly genuine. He was totally in love with Jesus. Whereas before people would say things and I'm in the church and blah, blah, blah. It didn't seem to connect with them. With him, he was utterly saved. And so that, for them, it's a big deal to leave their home place and go somewhere else. And they would do it for things like that. But he took his whole family, his wife and 7 or 8 children, and moved. And he said, I'm prepared to leave home and all of the community that I have there to share. And he went to a place up the coast from us where there were no believers. And it was just so exciting to see him go the extra mile, go and help people practically build their houses and all the rest of it. But God gave him a gift of healing. So much so that he prayed for people, they got better. People who were laid out paralyzed, he would go and pray for them and they would get up.
Wow.
Doesn't matter. He would pray for them. And at one point I said, brother, what do you do when people don't get better? And he just looked at me like,
what do you mean?
Of course they get better.
They always get
Wow.
I was just like, oh my word.
Oh my goodness, please teach us something, teach us anything.
But he was so gracious. He was so, he seemed to like being with me. I didn't have it all together. I knew I didn't, but he wasn't just, look at how many people are coming to Christ through us, or genuine. And, a Mozambican who loved the Lord Jesus, who's just interested in him and sharing Christ. It was wonderful. It was
that's precious in itself, that, you can connect with a local Muslim background believer who's sharing the gospel in Mozambique, and you can just be a little part of his story to encourage him as a brother. He's left his family. He's left his spiritual family now as well, let alone all the security that, a culture like that has with their extended family. But he's wow, what a sacrifice to go across Mozambique to a new area. And at least he's found a friend in you and a brother and someone who can just pray and blessing on him.
Us encouraging him. I think he was he
was.
It was the other way around. We often think as Westerners, we're going out there to bless those, but he was an encouragement to us.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
The other great thing was that some of the local believers that we were trying to work with in this time, we could send them to him.
Yeah.
And they could fly with him for a few days. And they got so encouraged because obviously he's language far better than we did.
Yes.
He knew how to cook the food and everything. Whereas, we had a lot of hang-ups and difficulties.
A lot of hang-ups as well. But the number of times that they would point to their black skin and say, I can't do what you're saying in terms of following Christ, in terms of living a mature, God-honoring life, because I'm black, basically. Wow. It was so, they had 500... What's
the logic behind that? Why...
Well, they had 500 years of Portuguese telling them that they were scum. It's that they couldn't even leave their town, their village, to go up the road. This is under the Portuguese, to visit their family without a piece of paper from the local white guy in charge of their village to say that they could leave.
That's shocking.
And it's easy to point the finger, obviously we've had colonial past from the rest of it, but that's the result. And so we, as white people coming in, of course we could encourage, we could help, but so many times I just wish I could change my skin. Paul talks about being all things to all men, and we can do that. We can try and live more basic lives, but there are barriers that we just can't cross. So to have Kutapata there, who was, he had one wife, he didn't sleep around. That was a big thing for him.
Amazing.
He had children who were also following the Lord, and they were a family who loved them together. So to point our brothers to them. He was
an example, a role model.
Yeah. Guys, how John Piper talks about filling up the afflictions of Christ, and how one of the roles that we play as cross-cultural workers is to almost demonstrate that incarnation in a different way, in a new, that obviously Christ in a very different way came in the flesh to be man and show us what God is like, but in a very small way that mirrors that. As we cross cultures, we go and we become needy and we become clueless, and we're like babies. We can't even speak the language properly. We don't know how to cook. Right. We're so struggling and we need so much help from people around us. Now, the danger is we lock ourselves in compounds and big houses and we don't ask for any help from our locals. But maybe that was one of the roles. Do you look back and think, yeah, God had us there to be needy white people and almost turn that colonial history upside down and show them something different? Actually, we're human, we're broken, we don't know what we're doing here, but it speaks to their culture in a different way.
It's something we definitely want to do, and I think we found it quite difficult because there was such this country. It was, as I said, one of the poorest countries, and it's very difficult because we've got gifts and skills that can't be taken away, like our education, like our white skin, automatically puts you in a different place to them. But we did. I mean, I remember the women being quite surprised. I remember walking up to visit church family once, and I deliberately not gone in our car, although we had a car. I deliberately walked with Katie strapped to my back, and they were flustering around me, being so worried. What are you doing out in the sun walking? What do you mean? You all walk every day, but they saw me as this fragile white woman that shouldn't. And it did. It meant something to them to get alongside them, and they did see that we were. The number of times we were called stupid.
Yeah, really.
Oh yeah.
They couldn't understand why we couldn't speak their language.
Oh yes, yeah. I've had that.
In that sense, because they can speak 4 or 5 languages.
Yes.
And they just thought we were thick.
Yeah.
Couldn't get it.
I think looking back, one of my it's a question mark for me as to whether the way that we lived was that the wisest, or was it the best in terms of connecting with people? Because we did have a vehicle, quite an expensive vehicle, because it was 4x4, because the roads were terrible.
Same.
In that sense, and we were 350 kilometers from where we would buy our food, but we lived in this house that we put resources in terms of collecting the rainwater and building these systems and tanks, and we had solar panels and all those types of things. But there's a debate in terms of how much can you give up? How much you're not there for a week or 2 weeks. You're there hopefully for many years. How many things can you live without on a long-term basis?
Psychologically,
and all these other things.
Because you can't eradicate your childhood and where you grew up.
And what I'm used to. So yes, we, in one sense, we gave up lots of things, but in comparison to the locals, we were kings. We thought we were doing without lots of things, but Atta was used to living with rats. Was used to, he was given a sack of rice every month by the people who sent him. Apart from that, he had to go out and grow stuff. That's how he lived. Oh. But he was so open. I've got a sack of rice. Whoever wants to, come and eat with me, rather than keeping it and then doling it out.
Wow.
He would use it until when it's gone, it's gone. It's just like, oh, wow. Whereas our attitude was, it's rained, we've got tanks, we've got enough water to last us 9 months until it rains again. We want to eke it out.
Yeah.
Everyone would come knocking on our door. Can we have some water, please? Because they say, you've got all this water. Why can't we have it? And so,
gosh, so tough.
Why is it for us just to go and use all the resources here that now we're done and we're the same as everyone else? It's a difficult thing to go in. Would it have been better for the gospel if we'd have we've got no food, no water, nothing now, like everyone else? But Jesus loves you.
Yeah. There's no easy answer, is there, to that?
It's difficult. And so it's a question. I'm saying we definitely did it bad.
Things we wrestled with out there and the team all the time.
Yes, exactly. And let alone, the generosity thing. And do we become we're like the local bank and everyone comes to us for money, and how's that going to destroy relationships or keep that sort of power balance in our favor because we're the ones doling out all that? This is what we discussed, wasn't it, at college all the time? That's what you're wrestling with, and you don't come up with easy answers. You don't come out with, oh great, I know what to do when I reach whatever country I'm going to, but at least you get that chance to start thinking about the issues and then see what it's like on the ground. And it depends who you are and what everyone's different.
I would say that it's a bit like parenting. You make the best choice you can at the time. and you ask for wisdom, and you ask people around you for wisdom, and you constantly, but you have to make a decision. And then whatever decision you go with it. And maybe you change after a while and you try something different. But
yeah,
I guess that answering my own question, it's like, well, we did the best that we could.
Yes.
Sure, we took mistakes. I know we did. But the Lord was with us, and he loved us, and he still loves us, whatever we did.
Yes.
And we learned very much. It was almost became like a mantra that, the harvest is ripe, but it belongs to God, the fruit to him. And we can only sow the seeds and be faithful with what he's given us and the people and opportunities he's given us. But it's up to him to transform the hearts. And sometimes that's going to happen immediately. Sometimes we'll see somebody like Rakia, and sometimes it could be in years to come. And it's been tragic watching what's happened to the town that we lived in Mozambique over the last 5 years with the local terrorism, and many of the houses people we lived with, they've been burnt to the ground and had to flee to another town as refugees. And we've been praying, our hearts have been broken. But we've heard stories of the missionary workers who are there now. They're saying, well, we've got amazing opportunities because these people are coming as refugees, and they're questioning their own Muslim faith because these terrorists are Muslims, and they're not between whether you're Christian or Muslim. They're just attacking everyone, causing anarchy. So people are questioning for one of the first times ever, and the local workers have opportunities to disciple. They're saying we've got groups growing, and I think we've been part of that journey, praying for God to move, praying for God to shake up Mohani, and that it's taken some tragic events to do that. But you look through the story of Israel. Sometimes he had to shake Israel hard.
100%. Yeah.
To open their eyes.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. And I know, Tim, this is one of your favorite verses looking back as well. But John 15, if we remain in him and he remains in us, we will bear much fruit. Jesus didn't say, and you'll see it with your own eyes.
Yeah.
No, we might not see it, but there will be fruit, and there will be much fruit. And you're right, Bronwen, it's just all we can do is do our part and leave the rest to God. Like you say, it could be 50 years from now, there'll be a major revival and things will change. People will come to know.
And that's certainly probably the hardest thing that I dealt with, is not seeing fruit. Almost seeing none. As Bron said, you'd have a few people who receive Christ, and then within a period of time, whether it's a few months or a year or two, fall back. And so it's just like banging your head against a brick wall.
Yep.
And that seems quite common with Muslims, but I think you talk to pastors in this country, and and they can often feel the same. And so it's a struggle. It's an ongoing battle. I need to stay connected into Jesus, and he is my hope. He is my everything. He's called us here, and we're doing what he wants us to do, and giving that over to him, saying, you're in charge. I'm going to trust in you with this work. And actually my identity is not going to be wrapped up into being this super Christian missionary, whatever, who sees all this fruit. Actually,
that's right.
That is not my identity. Is I am a follower of Christ. I am in Jesus. I am in Christ, and that's my identity. Whatever, and that's why it's the same for any follower of Christ in any context. That has to be our identity, doesn't it?
Yep, that's right. Yeah, we're not success driven. We're we're looking for faithfulness, aren't we? Yeah,
it's not easy. It's constant.
Yeah, definitely. Anything you wish you'd known before you went out there? I mean, you guys got some great training. We've talked about college quite a bit, where we shared those 2 years together, or that year together. But anything you wish you had known, and what were you well prepared for?
In some ways, I can't see if anybody had told us anything before we went out. I don't know if that would have helped. Because you can know something in your head. It's not until you experience it in your heart, and you have to grapple with this. And each and every situation is slightly different. So you have to live it and see. It's like me with the rats. somebody had told me that there were going to be rats, when I'm not sure it would have made much difference to me.
Yeah, that's true.
God working in my heart saying, well, I'm not going to take the rats away. I'm not going to give you a super way of killing them or preventing them. He has to work in your heart in those situations. And I think AI did a good job of helping us with the language. I'm a linguist myself, so I'm passionate about learning the local language. And I think they did a good job of giving us time to have the training in both the colonial language and the local language. There was a lot of language. And All Nations gave us, I think it gave us the head for asking questions more than giving us all the answers.
That's right.
Which helpful.
And then, Tim, what about the toilet cleaning?
I didn't mind getting up, and I think I do a good job now of cleaning our toilets.
You got All Nations to thank for that. I did the same. I always chose that chore because you get it out the way, don't you, fast?
There you go. Well, I think it's. I mean, now I'm work with AIM. I work with a bit like you, Matt, in terms of people coming through and trying to help them to get ready. And one of the key things is humility. Is not thinking that I've got it all together. And the more I see and the more I do, I realize I really don't have it all together in every area of my life. I don't have it together, but particularly for sending workers into the harvest fields. We go back to 2 Philippians, don't we? How did Jesus come? He emptied himself. He came as a servant. That is utterly crucial. And I think All Nations helps in that. And cleaning toilets, I think, helps in that. That we're part of the community, and the community needs this, and so I need to be part of helping with that. And so in one sense, it's a small little thing, but actually it speaks into a far larger need that we all have. Go as servants. Yeah. So it's much easier when you're trying to learn a language and they say, you're stupid, you're a baby, you're dumb. You're like, I am.
Yeah. Yeah. I was ready for that.
I reverted to 2 years, to being a 2-year-old in there. And that's okay because I'm in Christ. I'm a child of the King, and
yes. Someone else, I think our podcast has said, if downward mobility is the kingdom of God, then that's what we're all about. And actually going overseas, you go down in your wisdom and your knowledge and your even humor, mucking around and joking and having laughs. You just don't know how to do that if you don't have the language. And so it is a beautiful way to get close to Christ and what he's all about, isn't it? Emptying yourself like that and feeling frustrated.
There's one other just quick valuable tool I think we learned at All Nations, and Tim and I had been on different mission teams as well, so I think this helped, but learning to work with other cross-cultural team members. I mean, I don't know whether the statistics are still true, but they say most missionaries come back from the mission field, not because of rats or local challenges, but because of conflict with their own teammates.
Yep. And
we certainly worked in a couple of teams that had people from Asians and South Americans and people who came from very different church and cultural backgrounds, and some of them were aware that they had a cultural baggage and some weren't, and you could see that. And All Nations, and if you can get any kind of cross-cultural team experience before you go abroad, I think that's very, very valuable to learn what your own cultural baggage is, and then respect and work alongside others.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that's sometimes even that's the value of short-term trips, isn't it? You might not achieve much on a short-term trip. You learn a lot about yourself and what makes you upset or what struggles you might have or fears you have in a different culture. And so you come back thinking, okay, I know myself a bit better now. That might help plan as to where I go long-term.
Yeah, it's important.
Great. Well, guys, this has been amazing. So good to see you again. I miss those days at college when we'd throw water bombs at each other on the way to the dining hall, play table tennis, all the rest of it. Happy days. But the Lord's taken us on a journey, hasn't he? And, for me, a decade, I suppose, in and out of Pakistan, and you guys a decade in Mozambique. And I'm thrilled that you guys are still, hearts on fire for God, trying to encourage others to go to the nations from where you are right now in England. And we share that heart too. Thanks for being with me today. Thanks for these stories. So exciting to hear those stories from you. And I'm sure our listeners will love it. Matt. Yeah. All right. Well, bye guys. God bless. Thanks so much for listening. I hope today's episode has been inspiring and challenging. For more, check us out on our website, frontiers.org.uk, and on all social media platforms @FrontiersUK. Have a great week, and make sure you don't miss our next episode.